we're just giving it another 1 or 2 minutes so that people can join in. 7:30 usually, I think, has now become 7:32. I think everyone takes a little time getting in. Okay, it's 7:32. I think let's begin, and everyone can sort of keep joining in as they come into the webinar. So welcome everybody. This is, one of those special occasions that you get to ask anything from one of India's most respected diplomats, Ambassador Akbaruddin. And as you know, he was India's permanent representative at the UN. And now he's the Dean of the Kautilya School of Public Policy. We've been doing these AMA events, but there is always sort of a demand kind of to get him on so he can answer a lot of questions that you may have. But Ambassador Akbaruddin, today I actually wanted to start with something that's very topical currently around the world and in India, and relate that to what we actually do at Kautilya, which is policy. There are, in India, a lot of states are seeing flash floods, a lot of devastation in Himachal, in Uttarakhand. Globally, it's happening in the US, it's happening in Spain. Just to sort of connect what we see every day to what we teach and to policy. For instance, if it was one of our students dealing with a situation, not the aftermath. I mean, that's a different ballgame altogether. But perhaps designing a city, or helping designers plan a city, or helping policymakers make policy for a new city. How would that impact the lives of citizens, and how would that help perhaps prevent a lot of these things?
Monica, true to style, you always start with a googly, and I'm used to the more conventional form of facing a fast ball, but a googly is always different and difficult to face. So let me try and respond to you. That climate change is man-made is now well established. And it primarily stems from carbon emissions, also other gases, but carbon emissions. And so the thinking is that if it's man-made, human beings can also reduce its after effects or impacts. And that's the broad thinking. It was not conventional wisdom when I was studying. It was not even conventional wisdom till a couple of decades ago. But now, except for a few climate deniers, everybody acknowledges that it's because of human intervention. So human beings also need to act to either mitigate or adapt to climate change. So these are the broad two ways in which climate change impacts can be addressed, either through mitigation or through adaptation. Now, these are technical terms, but in the simplest form, all they mean is you can either try and reduce its impacts, or if there is an impact, try and adapt to a situation where the impact can't be mitigated, but it has to be adapted to. These are the two broad ways. Now, it can't be region specific or geography specific, because climate heeds no boundaries. It doesn't say, hey, I'm coming from Bangladesh, but I need a visa to come into India. I'll stop at the border. It just crosses because borders are man-made, and this is a natural phenomenon. And natural phenomena don't heed to man-made boundaries. If that is so, we can only act collectively to address them. It's not a question of a country or a group or even a continent addressing it by themselves. So it has to be a collective endeavor. And that collective endeavor, by definition, means everybody has to be more or less on board to address these issues. So there is a platform which is provided, which is through what is called the Conference of Parties. They meet annually and try to work out solutions at a global level. But then global level solutions are good, but they take a long time in, first of all, being arrived at, and they're always at a basic minimal level, because it's very difficult to get everybody on board. So you have to look at alternate efforts too. And those efforts are at the national as well as the regional level. So you said city, and it's quintessentially a regional or a local issue. So what should cities address when they can't? So they can do two things. One is mitigation, other is adaptation. So what is mitigation? They try and reduce their carbon footprint, which means have mass transport rather than focus only on individual transport, because individual transport, the carbon footprint is larger, you emit greater carbon, etc., and you're contributing to the problem rather than being part of the solution. So all new cities, rather than go through the process like you did in Delhi or we are doing in Hyderabad now, first build the city and then look at the ways to provide mass transit. It's increasingly, everybody tries to look at mass transit, which is also underground. You call it the tube, you call it the metro, what you want. So one level is transport, because transport occupies a large footprint. The other level is production of energy. Energy systems, if they are coal intensive, again, spew a large amount of energy. So you try and look for low carbon systems. People say no carbon, but actually it's actually low carbon, which means the footprint is lower than in others. So you could look at perhaps a controversial system, but nevertheless low carbon, which is nuclear. The advantage of nuclear, for example, over others is it gives you continuous base load, in the sense there's no deviations. Whereas you could also look at solar, but the deviations vary because at night there is no production of solar. Whereas, or if it rains, solar production reduces. So for factories, etc., you need a consistent base load. And that's why people look at the low forms, either nuclear. Now they are also swaying gas. It's a little higher than nuclear in terms of carbon imprint, but possibly. So one is energy systems, other is transport systems, and a third would be trying to regenerate and contribute. So trees which inhale carbon dioxide and exude oxygen, etc. So you have to look at those systems which are low carbon in footprint and can absorb carbon so that you become a carbon neutral city. That's one way in which. Now, what can our students do? So our students, when we started 2 years ago, we just had perhaps a course on energy, etc. Over the 2 years, we realized that environment, sustainability, climate are such big issues, and a large number of students are interested in this, that we started last year, we started increasing the number of courses related to environment. So we have a course which actually fits in very well with what you're saying. It's called the City and Sustainable Approaches to Urban Planning, where you learn all these elements. I've just given you a small idea of what could be the 3 big elements, but you learn many other elements, how solid waste management is done. There are many other elements that you could learn where cities can be made more sustainable. That's one. We also have the course on what we call ESG, which is environment, social inclusion and governance. These are big issues in corporate governance, and corporates no longer look at only profit motive, but they also look at how they contribute to ESG matrix. That's another course. A third course we're going to start is climate change litigation, in the sense that it's the fastest growing path of litigation because everybody is so concerned. There are class actions, there are actions against companies, etc. So what is behind this? How do you understand the legal implications of that? So as we grew, we suddenly now have an entire rubric or a pillar devoted to environment, sustainability, and governance. In 2 years, this is what has changed even for us. A, driven by the interests of students. B, driven by what the requirements of industry are. And C, we also are growing and understanding the implications of climate change on us. So climate change is not an event. It's a long drawn process. Addressing it will also take a lot of time. So you have to do many things in place before you try and address it. And so the long story is climate change now is an integral part of public policy courses. Most places, certainly it's key in our teaching of public policy.
Right. And so really a public policy study or a public policy career is not just about making a career. It could well go, into impacting lives and sort of even just the way we live and making it better. I also want to just say to all our participants that if you want to ask Ambassador Akbaruddin any questions, you can do so directly. Please raise your hand and we will unmute you. You can put your camera on or without your camera if that's what you want, but you can ask your questions directly. So just please raise your hand and we will get that done. Just moving on. Okay, we've already got our first question. Balaji Rastogi wants to ask a question. Priyanka, can we please unmute him and get him on? Yeah, there's Balaji. Balaji, you can go ahead and ask your question. Balaji, you're muted. You'll have to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, Balaji.
Yes, sir. My question is, I'm currently preparing for UPSC. So my question is related to UPSC.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
All questions are welcome on UPSC, climate, anything else, cricket too.
Yes, sir. So could you please recommend some? My optional is ESIR. So could you please recommend me something?
What is ESIR? First of all, I am not very good in acronyms.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Political science and international relations.
Right. I think I know a little bit about that. Look, let me ask you a question. Did you study political science and international relations before? Or
No,
is
sir.
it that, right? So what's your optional? What did you do? What did you study? Bachelor's?
Bachelor Electronics and Telecom.
Wow. So you're making a transition from a
Technical.
science background to a social sciences background.
Yes, sir.
Many have done it successfully. So don't worry that you're not the first. Keep that in mind. Number two is that increasingly people with diverse backgrounds are successful in other backgrounds. I know in diplomacy how many engineers, many doctors are successful. So it's possible, it can be done. Now, having said that, what you are asking is that for a exam, how do I prepare?
Yes.
Now, frankly, I must confess, I don't know the syllabus of the UPSC dealing with the civil services. But that said, neither has political science changed, nor does international relations change, irrespective of what the syllabus could be, because there are standard ways of understanding it. So I hope you have a good understanding of the Indian Constitution. Perhaps the best book on the Indian Constitution is D.D. Basu's Introduction to the Indian Constitution. It's the same book which has been in vogue for, I think, almost 30, 40 years. Certainly when I was a student, it remains in vogue right now. But beyond that, I would suggest there are new formats of learning and new platforms that you need to keep in touch with. So there are some very good, for example, if you want to understand current issues with a legal bent and a political science bent, like, for example, the UCC, etc. There are some very good Indian intellectuals speaking about them. So one of them actually teaches at our institution. His name is Dr. Faizan Mustafa. He runs a YouTube channel called Legal Awareness. I would suggest he does once a week or something. He takes up one issue, examines it purely from a legal perspective, from a policy perspective, and then points out the pros and cons in each. So I would suggest go beyond textbooks, start looking at other opportunities. There are also podcasts relating to international relations. So I don't know whether you listen to any podcasts, but it would be, pardon?
As I listen some podcast.
Right. So international relations, a good podcast is The Daily from the New York Times. So today, for example, I was just listening to it before I joined you. It talks about cluster munitions and how the US is providing Ukraine with weapons which are considered by more than 100 countries as inhumane weapons, because they are area weapons, they are indiscriminate, they last for a long time, etc., etc. Again, it's a good way to look at how what people say and what countries do is very different. So I would suggest look at some good podcasts. There are many, many. I just told you about The Daily because it deals with international issues of a policy nature. So there are many, just Google them, look at them, and start listening to them, because the more you are aware of things, the more you will be able to connect and write in your UPSC exam, because it's not only what you know, but how you connect them that is important. And so I wish you all the best. Look at new formats, look at traditional formats, and one of these days we'll look at you on television speaking on behalf of India.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Balaji. And we already have another question. Abhishek Dubey, Priyanka, Abhishek Dubey, please. And Abhishek, please go ahead with your question. Abhishek, please go ahead and ask your question. Can you hear us? Abhishek, I think you're on mute. Yes, we can see your raised hand. You have to go ahead and ask your question. You can ask it directly. Maybe he's having some internet issues. So meanwhile, Anjali Pal is saying, sir, I'm new in the field of law. International law seems too tough. What will be good to get comfortable with it?
Anjali, the way to look at it is, unlike national laws, international laws are, national laws have the power of the sovereign behind it, in the sense that if you don't fulfill something, there is a sovereign which will push you to do it. International law does not have a sovereign because all are sovereign states. So always start looking at international law as a softer form of law compared to national law, because national law is pretty specific. There are consequences, there are means of addressing them, etc. In international law, it's not always the same. Some even say international law is actually the law of the jungle, but that was some time ago, perhaps. But increasingly, there are norms which are set. So there are very many ways to go about it. One way to go about it is to look at international judgments. So there are books on the International Court of Justice. It's a nice way to look at it. What are the judgments? How they come about? Are they implemented? Not implemented? What are the shortcomings? So I would suggest don't get into the theory. It becomes very difficult to understand the theory unless you have practical examples. So I would suggest that go the other way around, understand the practical examples, and then try and get to grips with the theory. So perhaps that's the best way, rather than the conventional way of learning the theory and then getting to the examples.
Right. And so because, we obviously want to give everyone a chance really quickly, and the questions are coming in. Dr. S. Chella Vignesh wants to ask a question. Dr. Saab, you can unmute yourself and go ahead.
You're muted. Yeah.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, good evening, sir. And I'm very pleased to meet you. I have seen you last time during you are in the UN. At the end, you asked the journalist, I wanted you to ask the question today, like that. It's still in my memory. It came. Anyhow, my question is, since you are talking about international law, it's a softer form of law. I have interacted with juries, etc. To be particular, I have met a jurist who was a Chief Justice of Seychelles country. When I asked the question to him that whether people or diplomat will consider or consult with you while framing the laws, etc., those people are not included in framing the laws. And when during my interaction with other diplomats like Vishwanathan, sir, he worked as the ambassador for Latin America. I have poked him this question: only the people who are in the high table, they are getting chances to frame the law. Since the world order is changing and when India is emerging and we are aspirational country, how would you? I mean, how I can should see the things like whether if I have power, I can change the law, or if it is like I have to be first I have to set my things order within my country, and I have to look at other places.
So you've raised a very interesting question. And first of all, thank you, Dr. Chella Vignesh, because you seem to have a good understanding of where international law and how people are looking at it, because the Chief Justice of Seychelles is of Indian origin, but has a very good understanding of international law, because they are an island state, a small state, and they all require to abide by a rules-based system. Otherwise, it becomes difficult. For bigger countries, like you said, perhaps it doesn't carry the same weight as it would carry for small countries. But let me tell you one thing, that in the world today, the largest number of countries are those with populations of less than 10 million. Now you may say, oh, 10 million is not even Delhi's population. But yes, 110 countries out of 190 in the United Nations have populations less than 10 million. So they have a disproportionate influence on conventions, because it is they who want to tie up the so-called Goliaths. They are the small people in Gulliver's land. Gulliver cannot be captured by one person. So all sorts of Lilliputs get together and capture him. So international law is somewhat like Gulliver's, how he was trapped by Lilliputs by weaving various nets over him. And naturally, you may think it's not strong enough, but if Gulliver was trapped, so can big states be trapped. That's number one. Now you're asking me whether you have to set your house in order before you can impact on international law. So let's take a new case that's at the International Court of Justice. It's a case about climate change, and are there legal consequences now for states who are contributing to climate change, because there are small states who may get submerged because of climate change, whose livelihoods will be fundamentally transformed because of this. Now, it's not countries like India who would want this, or countries like the US or Russia. Oh, if some amount of coastline gets eroded, you will move further behind. That's all you would do. But small countries. So look at the countries who actually pushed for this to be discussed or addressed by the ICJ. There were small Pacific Island countries, starting with Vanuatu. Not many have heard about this small island country, but it spearheaded a motion that finally nobody could oppose. Everybody agreed that let's now refer this to the International Court of Justice to get an advisory opinion. So there you are, of how you don't need to have hard power only to try and address legal issues. There are many other conventions. Recently, you would have heard about the convention on, it's called BBNJ, which means biodiversity beyond national jurisdictions, or it's called as the High Seas Treaty. Basically, right until recently, or even right now, there is a certain amount of territory which are called your territorial waters, which is about 12 nautical miles. Beyond that, up to 250 nautical miles, you have a EEZ. Beyond that, there is no control. So the issue comes that can anybody invest and destroy the environment beyond that? Now, who wants to invest and who wants to use the resources? They're largely the big countries, because they have big companies, they have the money, etc. and do. Yet the smaller countries were able to craft together a coalition which has now said that beyond that it will be the territory. If you want to invest there, extract resources, a percentage of it will have to be shared with the others, because you can't extract anything that you want which are beyond your territories and not help others gain from it. So there are many such treaties where smaller countries have contributed to the growth of international law. So I wouldn't think that you need to be a big country only to do that, but you need to be a country which understands international law, which invests in having good lawyers, and which is ready to abide by those rules, because only those countries who abide by those rules will be able to push the boundaries of international law. And so if India has to do well, we need to invest more in international law. We need to not think that having judges at the International Court of Justice is a one-off effort. We need to have more international law experts who can tell us what is happening outside can have an impact on us. Like I told you, climate litigation. Climate litigation is not only a national issue, it's going to be an international issue. So unless you have people trained for it, understanding it, work with others in partnership, you won't be able to do well, irrespective of whether you're a strong country or not.
Right.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Chella Vignesh. So Dhruv Raj Singh Rawat has a question. He's saying that, can you please, sir, enlighten me about pursuing public policy as a career? He's doing his engineering, his undergraduate, his bachelor's in engineering. And he wants to know, how can we do it as a career? Who's going to hire us? And how do we create an impact for the company, for our communities and the country overall?
Right. I think that's a good question. One part of the question was asked by somebody who at the beginning of the session today said he's an engineer, wants to join the civil services and has taken political science and international relations, about which he has no great background because he is an engineering graduate. But his quest is to impact public policy through the public services. That's the conventional way that most of us have thought of public policy. You don't need to study at beginning. You join and then you study on the job and then you start impacting. That's not a very scientific way of doing it, that I learn on the job and then I will be the expert on this. Sure, you can do it. It's not rocket science, but it takes a long time. So you have to spend 20 years first learning it and then a last 10 years to try and implement it. But if that is so, it's a waste of your time to learn on the job, because you could do many other things on the job. So what's the other way of doing it? Increasingly, we've seen, and I myself acknowledge, that environment was not a big issue when I started learning things. It's become a big issue here. And the thinking is that anything that you learn today in your schools, colleges, has a shelf life of about 5 years. Beyond that, you should be able to have certain elements up your sleeve that you can keep learning consistently. And that's what is happening with public policies globally, in the sense governments are hiring people through the conventional way, but they realize that they are not able by themselves to deliver the goods of complex issues. So they take people as consultants, as contract employees for short periods, who have an expertise which governments don't have within their repertoire. So there is one other way of getting through. The Niti Aayog actually recruited 10 senior professionals from various fields, who are now working with government in various fields as joint secretaries in Government of India, which actually means if you were in a state government, you would be actually secretary, which means you have 20 years of experience as a civil servant. So they've recruited these people for 3-year terms, for 5-year terms, who bring in expertise directly to the government in areas where government professionals have not been able to develop that expertise. So that's one way. Another way is, as I said, consultants who can come for short periods or specific projects. A third way is governments are subcontracting their work to consultancies. You can see all governments are in some way or the other finding that they cannot recruit, they cannot hire people because their regulations are pretty tight. So they outsource it through a consultancy agency. That's another way to influence public policy. A fourth way to influence public policy is companies or corporates. Corporates are key in the way we are functioning because they have become partners in India's development. And when you have partners, you only want partners who are skilled, who can help you. Who can bring in investment, who can bring in knowledge, who can bring in good practices, etc., etc. So the corporates want people who understand government regulations. So we have several of our students actually joining corporates because those corporates want to understand government regulations better. Whether it is in the automobile industry where EVs are now becoming a rage and becoming a key ingredient of mobility. So they want to understand how governments will regulate them. Or financial tech companies, they want to understand how governments will regulate them. Another way is a very more conventional but growing area is political consultancy. All political parties want consultants who can help them analyze data, crunch data, give database evidence to find new pathways. So there are multiple pathways in which now you can contribute to public policy. It's a growth area and a sunrise industry in India just for the fact that we are latecomers to it. So right now, there will be a growth curve, which is very sharp, and many people will gain from it if you opt for this pathway.
Right. So Bittu wants to know that can he join a public policy course after having studied from IGNOU? He's got work experience as a freelancer and a businessman, and he has a passion to pursue a career in public policy. He's 31 years old and he's had some health issues which have affected his career.
So Bittu, let me tell you, you're very young by our standards. 31 is nothing because we had in our first batch a young man of 47 years old who completed the course and is back at where he started, doing much better than when he started by going through the course. So you are 16 years younger to him. If you decide to do a public policy course, at least with us, but with other places also, it's your call. Because public policy, we told you at the beginning, if you don't learn it, it'll take you 20 years to learn on the job. You are only 5 years. If you had joined the civil services, you'd be at 25, 26, 24. You're 5, 6 years old in the job. You have plenty of time to learn. Don't deter age. Don't let your age deter your passion. If your passion is to contribute, if your passion is to be helpful, be useful to the public at large, join it. There are no deterrents at all that I see. At 31, if you overcome your health issues, this is fine. But it's not that health issues, you don't need to be fighting fit to do a public policy course. You just need to be in reasonably good health, and I'm certain that you are.
Right. So as a follow-up, one of the things that we get asked a lot is that what is it that you, as the dean of the school, look for in an application or look for in an applicant, and how can people ace that application?
Yeah, I mean, I can't reveal all the trade secrets, but some, so that some of you can work through it. What do we look at it? We look, all selections are judgment calls. They are not a judgment on how good you are. We work on your potential. So what we look at is, do you have a passion to bring about change? It's a subjective judgment we make based on a discussion in an interview where if you want to go through that as a practice, it will be very tough on you. It can be stressful because we pose tough questions on what you want to do, what are the issues you want to focus on based on what you have written. So number one is we look at your passion. Number two is we also look on your ability to communicate in written format and through an oral conversation, because public policy is not only about thinking things. It is also about communicating things coherently, simply, and in a way that the public at large can understand. So communication skills, if you have them, good, or else we look at the potential that you have for improvement. That's another area. A third area we also lay stress is on diversity We now have students from about 15 states in India, coming from very diverse backgrounds and working together, because diversity has its own advantage, because it brings together value of people with different experiences who can add to each other's learning skills or experiences. Because if you are all of a same set, coming with the same background, with same understanding of issues, then you don't add very much in a course. But you come from diverse backgrounds, you gain something from each other. So peer learning is as important. So we look at diversity as another attribute when we select our students. And finally, we also look at your willingness to stand or withstand rigor, because it's not a course for the faint-hearted. We would want you to put in effort, because both you are investing in yourself, but so are we. And our goal is that your investments and our investments should pay dividends in terms of outcomes. So we look at people who just through their passion, willingness, etc., can stay the course in a course which is a little rigorous, because it's a multidisciplinary course. By that, I mean, most people in undergraduate level, you only do one discipline. So you come from an engineering background, you studied that part. You come from a social science background, you would study political science or public administration, sociology, etc. But public policy cannot be constrained. It's much more diverse. So having a diverse, getting understanding of a multidisciplinary course is a challenge. You have to put in more than what you're used to.
Right, but trust me, once you put in that more, what you get out of it is far more. But so Vaishali wants to know if we have any provision for scholarships that is provided to applicants.
So Vaishali, we couldn't have got the diversity without being sensitive to people who need economic support. The scholarships are available. They are on a merit cum means basis, in the sense we divide, say on a 10-point scale, we put in 5 points for your economic background, 5 points for your academic background. And then we total it up and see those of you who are more deserving using that matrix. We do provide. Several of our students get scholarships. Some also get 100% scholarship, which means they then only have to pay their hostel and food bills. But for that, you have to be good. You have to be diverse. You have to be able to contribute. But others do get a lower amounts of scholarship, etc. So scholarships are integral to our approach in having a very diverse cohort, which represents India in its very diversity.
Right. So and one of our attendees wants to know that can a law student, and he or she, they're law students, in a 5-year BA LLB course, that's what they're doing, but they're interested in a public policy course in international relations, and what should be their course of action, and is public policy the right course with law?
So there is no public policy without law. Law is the basis of all public policy, because it provides a framework in which you should operate. And public policy generally is also country specific and region specific. So an understanding of Indian law is intrinsic to understanding public policy. So number one, law is important. We don't want, if you studied law, well and good. If you don't study, it's not a problem. We have some of the best teachers teaching you. So that should not be an issue. Having said that, whether law can be a pathway for international, sure, it can be. The challenge in international institutions is that the competitiveness is higher. because it's not only a national engagement, it's a global thing. And when you look at the globe, they also look at many of the things that we look at, which is diversity. Are they representative? Are they women candidates, etc., etc. So the bar is a little higher, but it should not. There are people who've done it. So they are not Einstein, or they don't want. What people want in international organizations is, do you have a solid understanding of ground level realities? Because most international organizations place you at headquarters. And what is the most valuable thing at headquarters is an understanding of ground level. Because most people, if you don't have that understanding, then you're not of very much use to the headquarters, because you don't understand the realities at the ground level. So what you need is, apart from a rigorous course, you will need exposure and experience of work at a ground level before any international organization takes you. International organizations will not take people only with a degree from even the best schools. They will want at least a couple of years of experience before they look at you, because they say that experience teaches you many things that courses perhaps don't.
Right. You've obviously spoken a lot about this, but similar question from Samar Verma, who's a fresh BBA graduate and says, can I pursue this course now? I don't have any work experience.
Samar, of course, you can pursue the course. 65% of our students don't have work experience. So you are in the majority. All I said was that if you would like to join in an international organization, but before you join an international organization, you could join a national organization, a company, etc., where, or in fact, if I may say, virtually every fresher from our first batch, almost, if not every, maybe one may not have, everybody else has got a job. So opportunities for freshers are not barred from opportunities. The challenge for those who have experiences, they want higher pay scales. They want greater exposure. So that's a different type of challenge, but jobs for freshers is not an issue. You can join. The course is open right now. We're going to close in the next few days. Maybe Priyanka can explain to you, if you contact her, what's the process. They should not be lack of experience is not a deterrent, because 65% are freshers.
Right. And because you wrote about, you spoke about jobs, Bitu's asked that, he's absolutely fine now. And we're so happy for you, Bitu, and it's great that you're completely healthy. But he wants to know that if he does come, what is the placement scenario and how does that go about?
Yeah, I understand that's uppermost in everybody's mind, jobs, jobs, and more jobs. But let's put it this way. We had 44 students in our first batch. 38 have already joined. A few want to explore areas of their interest in higher education. And a few are still left over, but almost 85 to 90% have got jobs. So I mentioned at the beginning, jobs is not, if you can make it through our course and the rigor of that course, then I'm certain employers would want you, because they've seen the hoops through which we make you pass. So that's number one. Now, what are the types of jobs available and why a 2-year course? I think you need to understand that. You could perhaps get a job in a 1-year course. I'm not challenging that, because what we can do is don't give you a foundation and just make you practice for what can lead to a job. But we are not in it for getting you a job the first time. Our goal is that soon, within 2 years or so, you should start moving up the ladder. Then you should have those skills that will help you move up the ladder. And those are not the same skills that will enable you to get your first job. So if you look at many of the big people who have been successful, their first jobs were very small, very simple. But The next job and the third job and the fourth job is what you will also be prepared for as part of the course. And that's why we emphasize on rigor. That's why we emphasize on certain skills, which are not only about public policy, but are about leadership, are about communications, but are about understanding the world, etc. Because those are the skills that are looked upon when you move up the job ladder. Because those are soft, some call them soft skills, some call them smart skills. Those are the skills you need to have in equal measure, apart from the substantive educational skills to get a job.
Right. I think Abhishek Dubey also asked that can he do the course online? And I'm sorry, Abhishek, you cannot do the course online. Like the dean has sort of, he's spoken about it, he's reiterated. It's an extremely academically intensive course. And we sort of want all our entire cohort to be on campus. So it's a completely residential course. There is someone who wants to know how can they write their SOP, which is their statement of purpose. Do you have any tricks up your sleeve for that?
So choose a subject of your passion, and don't look at what is written on the internet and copy it, because we have tools to check it. So if you think that I can copy it from, say, the internet, there are now sophisticated tools that we use to say, hey, this is plagiarism. So don't go down that path. Number one, please don't pick up something which is unvalidated from the internet and do it. Having said that, you are approaching a course in a country as complex as India. So number two is don't give me examples of Iceland has this and it has solved the problem. And so I will immediately know that the complexity of India is evading you, because you are only taking about countries which have much easier issues to handle than complex countries like India. So there is no easy pathway to writing a good SOP except by putting in some effort. Again, it's not rocket science, so all you need is a few hours of effort. Think clearly, don't plagiarize, don't pick up examples which are not directly relevant for India. Be grounded. You're through.
And please don't use ChatGPT, because ChatGPT also throws up a lot of stuff that you may think it works, but trust me, when we look at the application, we will know that it doesn't work. So, okay, Prashant's raised his hand. Priyanka, can we get Prashant on? There, Prashant, yeah, go ahead.
Hello, sir. Namaste, sir. I'm audible?
Yes.
Sir, actually, first of all, I would like to tell you I'm a big fan of you. And I used to follow your videos when you used to answer it. When the Pakistanis media used to ask a question and you used to counterattack on them through the help of your cognitive power. Since then, I'm a big fan of you, sir. And sir, one question. Actually, I have already done my PhD in anthropology. Okay, in anthropology, and I would like to continue in this course also. Could you please tell me that what are the merits of this course that I can get and how I can get a leverage it in future? That's what I would like to know, sir, from this side.
So, first of all, thank you for your very kind words, Prashant. You're very gracious and you're very kind in your compliments, and I do appreciate that. Having said that, you are a PhD in anthropology, you said, and you've spent considerable amount of time gaining expertise in a certain area. Translation of that expertise into public good is what this course is about. There is not much that we can teach you about anthropology. You are a master or a PhD in anthropology, but what we can teach you is how to present your anthropological case in a manner that decision makers understand, how to communicate in ways that ordinary people can understand, because you have a sophistication as a PhD which is good, but we are not in theory land. So a public policy is not only about theory. It's a healthy mixture of using theory to impact practice or impact real life. So that's the transition you will have to make, and that's the transition we will help you make in through various skills that you can learn to translate your abundance of knowledge into a practical format. So, for example, simulations, because simulations will make you understand how different people think differently, because all the time you are thinking the anthropological way or an approach is perhaps the best. And sure, it may or may not be, but there are other approaches where you will come into competition with. You will also learn how to cooperate with people who are more inclined towards you. So organizational behavior is as important as knowledge of theory. So all those skills are some of those that can be available through a public policy course. And so it's your call. We've had in the past some people who were also teaching, who wanted to join with us. It's the challenge for you will be, are you open-minded enough to absorb other issues? Because generally, once you become a PhD, you tend to think that I am the very knowledgeable about that one part. But public policy is always multidisciplinary. So your willingness to absorb that other disciplines and benefit from them, even while you use your considerable knowledge, is what we can help you in.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. You deserve a
Prashant.
panegyric, sir. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, Prashant. So it's 8:27. As we wrap up, quick last two questions. Someone wants to know that do students face discrimination in placement if they are 30 plus? God, for us oldies, that just sounds. And someone wants to know that Bhupal, in fact, wants to know that he completed his graduation in 2016. And it was all this while preparing for UPSC, would now like to enroll for the public policy course. And what are the opportunities after completing this master's in public policy?
So two quick answers. The first one on, is there any discrimination? I understand that employers are actually positively inclined. There is an affirmative action for people who are experienced, because unlike freshers, they understand group behavior and understand institutional dynamics better. So in general, people would prefer people who had some exposure. So it's not a negative point, but a positive. We have several people who have 5 years experience, 6 years experience, 4 years experience in different areas, come and study with us. Upskilling is now the new norm. So don't ever think that if you upskill yourself, it will be held against you, but actually it will be held in your favor, because people will say you had the willingness to devote time, energy, and effort to improve your skill sets. And therefore, I think it's a positive way, not a negative one. As regards a gap in your intellectual or educational pathway, a gap is not a deterrent, but it will make you, because there are different skill sets required to get back into an educational institution or a classroom from a workplace. So it will be a little bit more of a challenge for you than it would be for somebody who's just making the transition from a bachelor's to a master's. But it has not deterred many, I've told you just now, many people have done it. Now, what's the jobs that you will get will depend on what you have learned and what you are interested in. Don't look at a job. We don't look at a job as only a means of livelihood. It's a pathway where you can make your livelihood. Of course, that's important, but that's only one step. It's also where you can make a difference, where you can feel satisfied at the end of the day that you're doing something good. So all these are essential in a job. Again, I don't have to say that you will get a job, because it's now the norm that most people make that transition fairly easily, compared to what were the doubts in many people's mind 2 years ago or 4 years ago. Right now, we don't see challenges of a major nature for our students to transition to a implementing role in a job, depending on their areas of interest.
And last, I'm wrapping up after this, I promise. An attendee wants to know that will people sort of who are coming from smaller cities and backward states, do they get any diversity advantage in selection?
So a diversity is a very broad concept. It includes broadly everything. But if I say that you will get only for a backward or a forward, etc., state, then I can only give one of them. So if you come from a state where there is none, certainly there is an advantage, because it will be counted as part of diversity. But that said, we are not looking at diversity in a very, very mechanical fashion. We are looking at people whose lived experience is different, rather than the state you come from or the region you hail from or your individual caste orientation. Frankly, in India today, we shouldn't even think of these things as impacting you. But what we look at is your lived experience adding to the benefit of everybody? And so we have many, many people coming from very diverse parts of India. In fact, recently, Manika and I were on an interview panel where a young man from Manipur got selected. And actually, I'm meeting him tomorrow online to tie up with him. And he's been in very difficult circumstances there. He was not able to contact us after he got selected because of the ongoing issues in that state. But he is so passionate. He's been asking NGOs to contact us to tell, look, he's still coming. He's interested. He wants to join the cause. Very interestingly, we have a student from Myanmar also, from the tribal regions there to come. So actually, diversity is an advantage, but it's not the only goal. And we will not look at it in a very narrow way. We look at your lived experience, if you can contribute, because the idea is all of us should grow together rather than just those who can afford or those who have the ability join the course. The majority of our students are those who get scholarships. So there are scholarships available, and we are only looking at, for joining, we look at a certain minimum requirement. Beyond that, it's a potential. It's how you utilize it and grow with the course.
Right. Okay. Now, since they're coming, and I promise I will take them. Any specialization possible in media and tech policy? I am nodding. Yes.
Yes. So we have a course called, so we have a pillar called Technology and Society. So if you were ever interested in media, you know how digital media is influencing policy these days. How it is, people now say, is television on its deathbed, etc., because there are new media coming up. So we have a course actually designed for media and society, but we also have courses now which are coming on technology regulation and artificial intelligence. We have another course on financial inclusion and technology. So technology, media is one part of that technology. It's not the only part. Technology is much more broad-based. So I would suggest that you shouldn't worry too much about specialization today, because your understanding of policy world is fairly limited today. Once you come in, you'll see, oh, there are so many other openings. And then maybe you're interested in, interest is in some other opening other than the one you came for. If I had followed only what I knew in my bachelor's, I would perhaps be teaching only Reddy and Kama politics in Andhra Pradesh, because I didn't know what international relations was until I joined the master's course of my political science. I thought political science was only about region, politics, caste, political theory, etc. But my eyes opened and it changed my own interest. And today I would just laugh at myself and say, oh, I've done much better than what I thought when I started. So keep yourself, keep your mind open. Doors will open where you never thought there are any doors at all.
Right. So with that, we're going to end this. Thank you everyone for attending. Thank you, Dean Akbaruddin, for sort of being here and giving us these incredible insights. And that's it, ladies and gentlemen. Have a great week ahead.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Manika.
you. Thank you. Thank you.